Good afternoon. It's Friday the 28th of February 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today in the studio, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
And we're going to get straight on with Syria and Turkey, Patrick, because, well, of course, last night the allegation is that Syria and allegedly Russia killed at least 33 Turkish troops. Of course, the Syrians and the Russians saying that this was attacks on Al-Qaeda-linked groups on positions that they hold in Idlib. But the first question to ask, I suppose, Pat, is were these really Turkish troops?
Well, this is the big question, and this actually was the same question, Mike, that was being asked when this identical type of incident happened just a few weeks ago, which triggered the current issues between the two countries.
Yes. So today, the Turkish minister, Sul Akar, claimed that Turkish artillery and, as you can see on screen, unmanned aerial vehicles hit 200 what they described as regime targets in Idlib, that they say neutralized 309 regime troops, destroyed 5 helicopters, 23 battle tanks, 23 guns, and also an air defense system and the Pantsir S-1 air defense system as well. So they say they've done quite a bit of damage here. And he also said that Russia knew in advance about the location of Turkish troops that were killed in Idlib. What did we have from the British press? Well, we have Quentin Somerville here from the BBC. He's BBC, isn't he? Yes. Saying today's losses bring the number of Turkish sources. Well, he's retweeting Shashank Joshi, saying today's losses bring the total number of Turkish soldiers killed in Idlib to 52 since the start of February. Several reportedly died in Russian airstrikes, though Turkey is loath to admit so. So this is the type of narrative that's coming out of via the British press. This morning then, the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, announced that the North Atlantic Council was going to meet following Turkey's request for an Article 4 consultation on the situation in Syria. He said under Article 4 of the treaty, any ally can request consultations whenever, in the opinion of any of them, their territorial integrity, political independence or security is threatened. So the North Atlantic Council, if you remember, that includes the ambassadors of all 29 NATO allies. They met this morning, and as Stoltenberg says there, under Article 4, any ally can request consultations whenever they feel like. Now, the key point here, Patrick, is that Article 4 is a mandatory precursor to Article 5. Article 5 is the Mutual Defence Clause, and the question is, did Turkey attempt to invoke Article 5 this morning at that meeting? Of course, Jens Stoltenberg wasn't saying, and even though he was questioned about this after he gave his press conference this morning by the journalists at the press conference, he wasn't saying. Now, we'll come on to Article 5 in a second. What he did say was that today's meeting is a sign of solidarity with Turkey. He said that NATO continues to support Turkey with a range of measures, including by augmenting its air defences, which helps Turkey against the threat of missile attacks from Syria. And he said, I thank Turkey for briefing allies regularly on the situation on Syria. Allies will continue to follow developments in the southeastern border of NATO very closely. I think that's a very key statement there. He is absolutely making it clear that this is an attack on NATO. But of course, this build-up for some kind of intervention has been building for quite some time, as we highlighted on last Friday's programme, Patrick. This was Mark Lowcock at the United Nations Security Council saying 900,000 people are displaced in northwest Syria. People are living in the most horrific conditions. Young children are freezing to death. It's a humanitarian horror story. And this narrative then echoed yesterday by Jonathan Allen, again at the Security Council. The intensity and pace of the Syrian and Russian campaign means that civilians who are able to get out of the way in time have nowhere to go. They have no shelter. They're forced to sleep in open air. Children are literally freezing to death. And again, let's come back to the BBC and Quentin Somerville, who's retweeting more rhetoric where children have died in the cold. They're starting to build up the same type of rhetoric, the same type of narrative that they have attempted to do in the past when they've been trying to build up some kind of desire for some kind of support for intervention.
These are emotive arguments, they're humanitarian arguments, and they thrust the children forward. And you'll see all of the news reports. The camera's always focused on the faces of the children constantly, and they're choosing the worst possible backdrops they can in order to film and just to show the suffering, etc. So humanitarian disaster, hence we must intervene. We have a, quote, responsibility to protect. This is back to the ARB 2P doctrine. So through Turkey's occupation, illegal occupation of Syria, and Turkey's illegal backing of extremist militant forces in Syria, and then folding them under the wing of the Turkish military to give them official, in effect, Article 5 coverage, Mike. I argued this 3 years ago, and a lot of people didn't take a lot of heed to it. But my point is that at some point, the U.S. or Turkey, they will pull the Article 5 card when they need to, and in order to stop Syria from liberating its territory. And here we are in 2020, and it's happened.
It looks like it's happening. It looks like it's moving in that direction. Anyway, as we mentioned at last week's Security Council, Karen Pierce absolutely focused on Russia. But then we had the narrative from the German ambassador to the UN in the Security Council saying we have an immense responsibility that we face here as the United Nations, as the Security Council, to stop what's happening. Now, of course, the problem is the Security Council isn't going to take any action here because any proposal from Western nations is going to be vetoed by Russia and possibly China as well. But let's just look at what it says in Article 5 of NATO. So here is Article 5. And it says the parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America. Is Turkey considered Europe for this purpose? I'm not certain.
This is a good question.
Yes. Shall be considered an attack against them all, and consequently they agree that if such an armed attack occurs, each of them, in exercise of the right of individual or a collective self-defense, recognized by Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations, will assist the party or parties so attacked by taking forthwith, individually and in concert with other parties, such actions as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. Now, so the focus is on the North Atlantic area, but what that also implies is that, of course, how much involvement you take directly is a sovereign decision by each nation individually. But then Article 5 goes on to say, any such armed attack and all measures taken as a result thereof shall immediately be reported to the Security Council. Such measures shall be terminated when the Security Council has taken the measures necessary to restore and maintain international peace and security. So this part of Article 5 basically says, well, NATO is taking upon itself the right to do whatever it feels necessary, but it must, whatever it does, it must keep the Security Council involved. And if the Security Council should then decide to step in, then all NATO operations should cease at that point. But of course, the Security Council is a divided body at this point, and there isn't really any prospect at this stage, should this escalate, of the Security Council stepping in. So this is a very dangerous situation, Patrick, it seems to me. And I ask again, did Turkey attempt to invoke Article 5 today? Stoltenberg wasn't saying, it's not clear yet, but the suspicion must be that they have been keeping NATO informed. As Stoltenberg said in his press conference, they have been keeping NATO informed at every step of the way. So today's Article 4 meeting was exceptional. And it is a mandatory precursor to invoking Article 5. I believe that is probably what they were doing. And perhaps, sorry, just before you comment, Pat, perhaps we get a clue from this, because NetBlocks was making the point that, yes, that over the last 24 hours, Turkey's internet social media platforms have all effectively been shut down. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Facebook Messenger all blocked via multiple internet providers in Turkey. Real-time network data indicate filtering in effect by the operators, incident ongoing. So that's not downtime by some kind of technical issue. That is filtering by the providers. That can only have happened as a result of a government request.
Well, what you're seeing is a preparations possibly by this Turkish government for war. with Syria. There's also been statements that are circulating right now about Turkey ordering or preparing for an attack, a full-on attack on the city of Aleppo. And I might remind people as well that President Erdogan in Turkey has made multiple public statements. You can go ahead and look these up, especially if you put in Turkish language, saying that he believes that Aleppo should be part of Turkey, or should come under the Turkish, auspices. And he's made a lot of these neo-Ottoman type statements in public addresses quite frequently, and it's part of his thing, like Trump. It's kind of his "Make Turkey Great Again" whole shtick. Okay, but what we have is very dangerous here, Mike. There's no way that this qualifies under Article 5 for the simple reason that Turkey is not being attacked. The country of Turkey,
they've invaded Syria. They've been attacked on foreign soil, so it's not an attack on a sovereign nation.
Exactly. So it's trying to make this stick from an Article 5 point of view is not possible. So, but this is a very dangerous that they're invoking the treaties in this way, Mike, because this is the sort of power politics and entangling alliances and kind of the vague interpretation of alliance treaties that led to a situation like World War I, where you have a war for war's sake and not for any really good underlying reason at all. Not that any wars have good underlying reason, but this is the danger of the current situation. So, you can't stress that enough, how dangerous this is right now.
Well, let's just remind ourselves of what the Russian ambassador to the UN said in the Security Council last week, because it is extremely relevant to what's going on. He said, "We have heard of all of today's rhetoric on many occasions this month. You're playing the card of civilian suffering and long-term truce every time the terrorists you cherish are in danger." So that was an attack by Vasily Nebenzia on the Western powers and on Turkey. The terrorists you cherish, we do cherish these people, these so-called rebels in northwestern Syria at the moment. Our governments do, at least. And so that's pretty much deserved criticism.
But he has hit the nail on the head here. He knows exactly what the game is. And the game is this. The reason this is kicking off right now, Mike, is because the United States is completely out of the loop. They've been out of the loop with the Sochi process. They've been out of the loop with the Astana process, all these different peace processes, ceasefire arrangements between Turkey, between Syria, bringing in Iran and bringing in all the stakeholders. Even the rebel militants, as they're called, they were even included in Sochi and in the Astana process, okay? The U.S. was not invited, okay? So they're not a broker anymore for the region. And so what this will bring, if they can make this a big enough crisis, it will open the door for the United States to enter with peacekeeping forces. Now, once the U.S. have any kind of an international mandate to have troops on the ground in Syria, that then justifies the other troops they have in northeastern Syria, Mike, that are occupying the oil fields currently. So in a way, it kind of green lights all these sort of illegal occupying activities that the United States has been engaged in Syria now for years, okay? But it'll mean that the U.S. will have its foot. It'll be able to put its boot down in Idlib or in some way, shape, or fashion, or NATO countries will do that on behalf of the United States. But it'll legitimize international forces, basically, in Syria, and also make it almost impossible to clear out the terrorist factions that are currently occupying the province of Idlib.
So we'll end with Quentin Somerville once again, who's retweeting Bethan McKernan, who's taken a photograph of the Russian Admiral Makarov. 2 ships Russia has said they're sending to the Mediterranean, to the region, equipped with Caliber cruise missiles for the Syrian coast. And of course, Quentin Somerville here implying that Russia is doing something aggressive in this. I view that somewhat differently. That looks to me like Russia's doing something defensive here, because it's, at the end of the day, Turkey is involved itself in an insurgency in another state. It really shouldn't be there.
Invading another state,
yes.
Its neighbor, in fact. So Turkey is doing a violation of the Nuremberg Principles. It's an undeclared war of aggression against a neighboring UN member state. So, from just by the definition of the letter of the law, Turkey is in violation of international law. But as we see time and time again, international law does not apply
yes.
To some countries, only to others.
Yes. Okay, so we will continue to watch this as it develops. It's potentially extremely serious, and we'll keep you posted. Now, Patrick, this week you've been in London at the Julian Assange hearing.
That's right. That's right. This week was the U.S. extradition hearing for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, and as a lot of people know, he's being held in Her Majesty's prison in Belmarsh, southeast London, and he's been awaiting extradition to the U.S. So we're going through the hearing process now. His legal defense team is obviously mounting a major challenge to U.S. extradition. So this was held, interesting, it was moved from the Westminster Magistrates Court, where it was originally intended to be, and moved to the Secure Court, which is affixed to Belmarsh Prison. This is for violent criminals mainly, and it's also a counterterrorism court, so it has all the features of the sort of secure facility, including a bulletproof glass around the dock, which sits in the back of the court, where the defendant will normally sit with the security guard. We'll talk and show some imagery of that, what that might look like according to drawings and things like that. But yeah, so just moving forward here, this is Monday at 5 a.m. at the gates of Belmarsh Prison, so we had to queue up early every morning, Monday to Thursday, to sort of make sure you had a place. It's a very small facility, and a lot of media showed a lot of interest, Mike, the first 2 days, but less and less interest
As the time went on.
Yeah,
yes.
it seemed to me like a lot of the media cut and ran after the prosecution gave their argument Monday morning, because they heard everything they needed to hear,
Yeah, right.
and they moved on. But there was a pretty significant protest camp outside of Belmarsh that seemed to get along very well with the prison administrators and the police and so forth. So it was, peaceful. They were, quite noisy as well, quite vocal, and that could be heard inside the courtroom throughout most of the proceedings. So it did have an impact one way or another on the proceedings. But the support was it was international. People came from all over the world. Actually, I met there were hundreds of people that participated in this throughout, and that's not an easy location to get to out in southeast London.
Yes.
So just moving on here. So let's look at Julian Assange's extradition hearing. Let's look at what the defense is basically outlining in terms of their arguments here. And there's a lot more detail to this, Mike, and we'll point to various reports that you can find online. But essentially, they're going for a challenge on the basis of abusive processes, and there's a number of things that Assange's defense team believe that have been an abusive process by all authorities that have been involved in his apprehension, but also in the U.S., mainly in the U.S. government's 18 and 17 superseding indictments against Julian Assange. These include ulterior motives. They're saying these are political indictments, and a blatant misrepresenting of facts in the indictments themselves, which constitutes an abusive process. So they challenged every single point that the prosecution made, and including the 18 indictments, and showed how flimsy this case was. In fact, how ridiculous this case was, and even debunked it, Mike, and dismantled it based on publicly available information that's already out there in public. It was absolutely shocking how poor the United States indictments are, and the fact that they say something on paper that you can actually refute in 1 minute on Google.
Reminds you of Russiagate, really?
It does. So it is beyond a joke, and so his defense is arguing there's no way we can possibly. They've been absolutely intentionally misrepresented the facts, and because the U.S. has all of this information, they argued. So there's no way that they could have got this wrong in the indictments. They've intentionally manipulated the charges to to give them the ability to pursue the agenda that they want to sort of render him to the United States on a false pretense. So no extradition for political offense. This is a big one in terms of extradition law. And this is incredibly complicated because you're dealing with balancing between international treaties, human rights conventions like the European Human Rights Convention, and also bilateral treaties between the United States and the UK, and then also how this interacts with British law, with British Acts of Parliament. And so there's the question of what rights are being given, what rights are being mentioned, what rights are implied. It's incredibly complicated. There's a lot of room for interpretation here, and we'll show you some of these arguments. And also that he will not receive, this is the last point up here, he will not receive a fair trial in the U.S. And they made that argument pretty convincingly, just based on comments made by U.S. officials, comments made in the national media. Julian Assange is being characterized not as a journalist, but as some sort of cyber criminal and a Russian asset. And WikiLeaks is a foreign non-state actor, hostile intelligence service. So, based on all of these things, it's a pretty convincing case that he will not get a fair trial, or in the Eastern Court of Virginia, where it's a national security court and nobody has ever been found innocent in this court. So it's a complete kangaroo court. And by the way, the prosecutor, James Lewis QC, who, by the way, is working on the Bloody Sunday trial, is coming up as well. I believe he also defended Pinochet, I'm not sure, against extradition from the UK. But so obviously all of the CVs of this level of lawyers are interesting to say the least. Yeah. But he made the comment straight off the bat in the first 5 minutes of his opening arguments on Monday morning that Julian Assange, quote, Julian Assange is not a journalist. So that was established by the prosecution from the beginning. And of course, that was very easily refuted by the defense. But let's move on and take a look at some other aspects of this. So we also have the violation of human rights. So including there the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 5, arbitrary detention. This has also been backed up by the United Nations. Article 10, which is kind of freedom of speech or freedom to publish information. So freedom of the press could be included under this as well, but also the Magna Carta as well. So the defense also mentioned the Magna Carta as an important protection for Julian Assange in this case. I mean, there's a number of other good details on this as well, which we didn't get to, but just moving on here. So this was an article I published yesterday morning, early, before we went into the courts. But Assange's courtroom drama speaks to this illusion of justice, and an incredible situation unfolded here. And what it was there were a number of complaints. Julian Assange complained early he couldn't focus, so possibly they needed to recess, but he also couldn't hear hear what was being said.
Because he was inside this glass box?
He was inside a glass box at the back of the court, and that's very unusual for a nonviolent criminal who's not charged, not convicted with anything. But they're treating him like a terrorist, basically.
Well, no, they're not, because as we saw in the news this morning, the man that's accused of shooting the journalist in Londonderry dead has been released on bail, so they're not treating him like a terrorist at all. The terrorists get out on bail, Julian Assange doesn't. Yeah,
he's being held indefinitely in arbitrary detention. So what was interesting about this is the judge capitulated and gave him a set of headphones and a wireless receiver on Thursday morning, and he was wearing them for a while so he could hear what was being said about him. So I mean, this doesn't look good, basically, from in terms of a fair hearing here in the 21st century. But he discarded them after a while and put them away, and he was a bit reprimanded, or the judge said, well, we made this available to Mr. Assange, and so his lawyers said, we would like. They asked the judge, we would like our client to be released from the dock and to sit with us. And we'll show you just briefly here what this is a courtroom sketch in the media. And so here he is next to a Serco guard from the private corporation Serco. And one of the complaints they said was that, she said, well, you can go up and there's a slit in the glass and you can talk to your client through that slit in the glass. And they said, well, then the security guard can overhear it. Also, there's U.S. agents in the court. They could overhear as well. The prosecution can overhear. Number of people, so we don't have any private exchanges and communication between our client. So how can he engage and participate in his own hearing? And the answer is he can't. But she said, no, that's plenty. You have enough. You can pass notes. And she says, if we need to stop every 5 minutes, then you can go down in the basement, we'll recess, go down the basement, consult your client for 20 minutes, and come back. And they made the argument like, well, that's not very practical to run a trial like this. And she said, well, if it's scheduled for 3 weeks in May, witnesses and evidence from May 18th, but if it takes 6 weeks, so be it, said the judge. So it's impossible. Imagine stopping every 5 minutes just to speak to your clients. So why can't he sit next to us? And they said, well, we have to bail him because he'll be out of custody. But they said, well, you can still be in custody and be in the well of the court. So it got into this technical argument. But so it was quite surreal, Mike. And just to see the absolute flat rebuffing of anything the defense was requesting in terms of being able to have access to their client, and he have access to the defense.
And what was the prosecution's attitude to this discussion? The
prosecution was very neutral. They supported either way. They had no objection at all to, it seemed, for Mr. Assange to be released from the dock. It was just a question of the how that would be done administratively, according to courts, the ways and means of the court. The Crown Court in this case. This is Woolwich Crown Court. This was being this hearing was being held in, Mike. But it's absolutely incredible scene because you could see there was they were not giving him any quarter whatsoever. So he was going to stay behind that glass box for the entire hearing coming up in May. That would be unbelievable, especially with some of the witnesses coming in, and especially because Assange himself is such a central figure in the story, and technically as well, has such a great technical knowledge and insight of all of the issues that are going to be discussed. So, but here's just a quick snapshot here. His two QCs, Edward Fitzgerald and Mark Summers, just sitting in front. He's behind them and quite far behind in the glass as well. Here is the judge, and when also confronted is Vanessa Barreza. She's the Crown Court judge in charge of this. And we don't have her photo up, Mike, because Craig Murray commented on his blog on this. She's the only person in Western Europe that doesn't have an image on the internet. One of the only people in known existence, has zero footprint on the internet. So we've put this up here just to represent her. But she was confronted by the defense, who said, and Julian Assange stood up as well and made outbursts to the court, shouting through the glass slits, Mike, saying that, and his defense said he had been strip searched twice between Monday and Tuesday, I think, and he was moved to 5 different cells, and he had his privileged court papers handcuffed 11 times, had his confidential attorney-client court papers confiscated by prison guards. So, and when challenged on this, Mike, this was the reply of the judge. I cannot be expected to rule on the conditions which Mr. Assange is being subject to. I'm paraphrasing slightly here from my notes, but you will have to take it up with Her Majesty's prisons.
Well, if she's not to be expected to rule on this, then who is?
Well, she's basically passing the buck to the prison system. But all of these things, especially having security at the prisons confiscate your legal documents, this has a direct effect on getting a fair trial. This could risk a mistrial. So it actually does. And in fact, there are precedents where the judge can rule on many of these things quite easily, in fact. So there's a lot of back and forth there, a lot of problems with these issues, Mike. So, but just moving on to the next issue is the issue of extradition, and this is incredibly complex. We'll just show you a couple of the main points of contention here. So there is a UK-US extradition treaty. It's been updated, but the original one was 1972, which bars extradition for political offenses. Here's the problem. It hasn't been incorporated completely into British law. So what you have is, and this is what the prosecution is arguing here, we have the UK's 2003 Extradition Act, which the political offence exception was removed from that act. So the act is effectively silent on the issue of barring extradition for someone for a political offense. And espionage, which is what the US are effectively indicting Julian Assange for, is by definition, really, it's a pure political offense. So the prosecution, James Lewis, is arguing, no, it's not in British law, so therefore it's not stated explicitly, so therefore it can't, we can't interpret international law in a British Crown court.
Oh, really?
Yes, he's saying that it's irrelevant. So everything the defense is arguing is completely irrelevant, that we just have to execute this extradition order because we have an agreement with the U.S. So, but he is in effect trying to, have his cake and eat it too. So this is a really complex issue, and it's really a British constitutional issue that he's invoking. He's invoking the sovereignty of Parliament there, and basically saying international law has no bearing whatsoever on how the court should rule on this. So, and then that gets into an argument. If it's not explicitly stated, Mike, it might be implied, and of course this is what the defense is arguing and showing a number of precedents where that actually happened. So this is a real battle here because this could make or break the case, this issue here. But let's look at what James Lewis, QC, he's the head of the U.S. prosecution team. So his basic argument is Assange is not entitled to derive any rights from the 1972 treaty, which is public international law, and no right to argue for political offense exception as it has been abrogated by Parliament in the 2003 Act. And there's reasons why they stripped it out. And there is, by the way, no extradition between European countries for political offenses.
Right.
David Shaler, they couldn't extradite him from France for that very reason. And if Catherine Gunn, for instance, the famous GCHQ whistleblower, if she had fled to France, they wouldn't have been able to extradite her back to Britain for breaching the Official Secrets Act. So this is an interesting point of argument here. Now here is the defense. This is Edward Fitzgerald, QC. He's head of Assange's defense team. This is what he's saying, or what they're saying. He called James Lewis's argument a very strange Alice in Wonderland world, invoking the sovereignty of Parliament, a bizarre argument. So to rely, he was saying to rely on the treaty to file the application, the UK...
Yeah, so he's basically saying we have a treaty in place, so the extradition should go ahead, but we have to ignore the treaty when it comes to the political exemption.
The political exemption.
Yes.
So he's saying, in effect, that you can't have your cake and eat it too. So and if that was a very strong argument by the defense. So really, it's going to come down to which side this judge is going to side with, how the interpretation of that.
But based on what we've seen in terms of this judge's reaction to various aspects of this case so far, it seems like a done deal.
It does. It seems like a political show trial.
So the question is, has she done enough to give the defense justification for calling a mistrial, or for, at the very least, an appeal?
Well, a lot of people are talking about that they're, looking at other past cases, it absolutely could, they would deserve to have a mistrial in this case. But in the event that doesn't happen, it's automatic grounds for appeal to the High Court.
Right.
So if he doesn't get a decision in his favor, Assange, by the end of May with this hearing, it's a certainty that he will be granted an appeal to a higher court, which is the High Court, and then after that to, if necessary, to the Supreme Court. And I don't know if there's any higher authority than that, or the European Court of Human Rights, or would that not?
No. Well, not in this case.
Is Britain still opted into that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But I don't think that would. I don't know. We'd have to check that.
But the European Human Rights Convention is separate from the EU,
yes.
and Britain is a signatory to that.
Yes.
So, but basically, the prosecution saying, send him to the U.S. We follow the letter of the law, we send him to the U.S., and he'll get a fair trial when he gets to the United States. Don't worry, says the prosecution.
Of course.
These are what the U.S. lawyers are telling us. So, but it's pretty clear that he's not going to get a fair trial in the United States, Mike. So a lot of people are hoping that it ends
here
on British soil, that Assange is acquitted and released as soon as possible. So it's a race against the clock, essentially.
Yeah.
His health is suffering. His mental faculties are suffering. He is absolutely vulnerable and exposed on many different levels in his indefinite detention. So how long can Julian Assange, the person, how long can he endure the sort of treatment he's getting by the British state right now? And if he goes to the U.S., again, same thing, Mike. Appeal to the high federal court, then to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
That whole process from now, if that happened in the United States, we're talking about 5 years.
Yes.
So this is the question: 5 more years of his life.
Okay. Okay, now if you like what the UK column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. There are options for supporting us there, and your support much needed and much appreciated. And another reminder of the MH17 event taking place on Tuesday the 3rd of March, that's this coming Tuesday, in the Conway Hall, Red Lion Square in London. Entrance is free, and this is all about challenging the EU-NATO version of events surrounding the shootdown of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 in 2014. That's going to be hugely interesting an event, and if you can possibly get along to it, we strongly suggest you do.
Yeah, I'm planning. I have a lot of questions I want to put to the filmmakers about their investigation, about the evidence that's shown here, Mike. And so for me, it's going to be a great opportunity to interrogate some of the aspects of this story, some of the unanswered questions. But I've seen the trailer for the film, Mike, that they're going to be screening as well, and it's absolutely stunning. They're going to do a screening of that in a great venue, Conway Hall in central London. And also the fact that they've made it for free, I think it seems like the organizers want to open it up to as many people
as possible.
They want as many people to come, so I think that's incredibly generous of them. So yeah, it'll be very interesting.
Now, on Monday's programme, we talked about Britain committing to new nuclear warheads for the Trident system. Well, yesterday in the Security Council, there was a discussion about nuclear weapons. This was a session which was to discuss the 50th anniversary of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the 5-year review conference, which is going to take place from the 27th of April until the 22nd of May this year. Now, the Russian envoy, Vasily Nebenzia, was again speaking, and he said Russia expects a response to Vladimir Putin's proposal to extend the New START treaty without any preconditions. Of course, the West putting preconditions on this. And he said that that it was the US which is getting in the way of getting rid of nuclear weapons from this planet. He said the military actions taken by the US and NATO over the past decades, as well as Washington's threats against a number of states, including Russia, only postpone the goal of creating a nuclear weapons-free world. Well, this is what the US had to say about it. Here is Cherith Norman Chalet, or Chalet, or I'm not really sure how her name is pronounced, but anyway.
In America, probably Chalet.
Yes. Yeah. She said that we cannot overlook the actions of those states that are expanding and modernizing their nuclear stockpiles, as well as developing exotic delivery systems, threatening their neighbors and violating their arms control agreements. I can't imagine which state she was talking about there, but the rhetoric continues to impress. Patrick, I say...
think she's talking about the United States, Mike.
Well, there you go. Amazing. What are the Russians so upset about? Well, of course, it's this. And this was announced at the beginning of February. And here's Defense News covering it. Trump's new nuclear weapon has been deployed. And what are they talking about here? It's a low-yield nuclear weapon. They're calling it W76-2. A low-yield variant of the nuclear warhead traditionally used on Trident missile, and it was first reported its existence was first reported on the 29th of January by the Federation of American Scientists. And the point about this, Patrick, is that the warhead is designed to be smaller than the weapon detonated in Hiroshima during the Second World War. So these are low-yield nuclear weapons, smaller than the Hiroshima bomb, or of around the same size, deployed via Trident. And then, of course, as the United States blew the whistle on last week by accident, the UK getting involved in this as well. So what are we saying here? Low-yield nuclear weapons being deployed onto US submarines, already being deployed on one US submarine and likely to be further deployed. The Russians absolutely up in arms about this because their attitude is that putting low-yield nuclear weapons onto a platform increases the likelihood of them actually being used because the consequences of using them are less than the sort of traditional view of nuclear weapons. So they see that they are extremely concerned about this deployment, and I think they're right to be.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so that you can make a kind of a risk analysis if you're the Pentagon, saying that, well, we're going to use a low-yield nuclear weapon to respond against some type of an attack that they think was proportionate. So that their response with a low-yield device would be a bomb, would be proportionate. So what it is he's absolutely correct. The likelihood of using it is much greater. The fact that it's even being rolled out is proof, I think, of intention to use it. I don't see any deterrent factor at all. All I see is some sort of tactical. It's a tactical weapon, Mike.
Right.
It's not for deterrent. It's a tactical weapon.
Right.
They already have nukes for deterrent, so it's for battlefield tactical advantages.
Absolutely.
So.
Now, good news, Patrick. Greta is in Bristol. She has arrived in Bristol for a big march. Now, she addressed the crowd, which this tweet says, not attempting to estimate, but clearly a vast crowd here in Bristol awaiting Greta Thunberg in the rain. I don't think it was a vast crowd at all. It was certainly a reasonably sized crowd, but not millions by any means.
Lucky it didn't snow today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, in the run-up to this, of course, the police suggesting that children were going to die in the streets because of through crushing. There were going to be so many people there, but in fact, not so many people turned up. Greta addressed the crowd at 11 o'clock this morning. In parallel with this, Greta's mother has released a book, and The Guardian, very excited to be telling everybody about this book. They excerpted a little bit of it. Milana Erdman, on daughter Greta Thunberg, she was slowly disappearing into some kind of darkness, and really what this is highlighting, or at least they're sort of highlighting the point that Greta has changed from being a bullied teenager to being some kind of cultural icon, and what a rise this is. But of course, we've got to remember that she suffers from various mental problems. She
spectrum disorders.
No, but even before that, whenever she says that whenever Greta first heard about climate change, that this led to her 2-month period where she didn't eat anything. She lost 10 kilos. Then at the age of 12, as you say, she was diagnosed with Asperger's. And then she was subsequently diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder and selective mutism. So she only speaks whenever it suits her.
She claimed to be able to see CO2 in the air. She has kind of a special ability to see CO2,
right,
trace gases. Which I thought was interesting.
So, in Bristol today, I think this child is being exploited, and really there aren't enough questions being asked about that particular aspect of this train ride that she's on. It's not right.
I suppose it'd be okay if she learned to play guitar, Mike, and she was a great singer. It would be all right. But a lot of people don't think that this is a political. The climate campaigning is not political, and I think we've made reports and shown quite a bit of evidence to the contrary, yes. Mike, on this program, that there is a massive political element, financial as well, element behind Greta's campaign. So that's why we're saying that we think it's a high chance that she is actually being abused and used by some powerful forces and organizations.
Absolutely, and we have to end with some more good news, Patrick, because Laura Kuenssberg, amongst others, has won an award from the Royal Television Society. This is just amazing. So that she was tweeting this out this morning. Very happy to collect this award tonight along with great colleagues from ITV News, Sky News, Channel 4 and Channel 5 TV after the privilege of covering an extraordinary story. That's Brexit, of course. TV is a team sport, apparently, according to Laura. Yeah. And Pat, the thing that really struck me about this, within the context of the Royal Television Society that said that gave this award jointly to all these people, on the basis that Brexit was a particularly difficult subject to cover. But nonetheless, what Laura Kuenssberg is expressing there isn't, 5 or 6 independent television news networks. This is a cartel. Sure. In operation here. And, what have we got? Rapid response mechanism at work, a common narrative being explained by a team across the television news networks.
She was caught red-handed, this smug award, Mike. She was caught red-handed in the most biased political coverage of the general election by the BBC, led by Laura Kuenssberg herself, that anybody had ever seen. I mean, I've never seen so much of public backlash against somebody. That's why, the main reason why she's been given this award.
Yes.
It's a thank you for the general election, for destroying Corbyn and boosting Boris, basically. So it's pretty incredible. So they're giving out awards left, right, and center, Mike.
Absolutely, and of course Emily Maitlis also got an award for her fantastic interview with Prince Andrew.
Her hard-hitting interview against Prince Andrew. And by the way, go back to that tweet real quick, Mike. If you want to just keep your finger on the pulse of Orwellian propaganda, follow Quentin Somerville's Twitter feed. You will get everything. See how many times we featured him in today's show.
Yes.
So whatever he's retweeting, that's what the establishment want you to see, and this is what they're, cheering and sort of champing. So
absolutely. Well, look, we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you very much, Patrick, for your input, and thank you for joining us. We will be back at the same time on Monday, 1 p.m. as usual. Have a great weekend, and hopefully we'll see you then. Bye-bye.